Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Also, find me at Sonic Cinema Podcast on YouTube. Today, I am joined once again by Matthew Saliba, aka our Sonic Cinema's official Godzilla expert, if you will. We've discussed the history of Godzilla with the classic films as well as the more recent films already on the podcast. We also discussed Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris for the class of 1999 series. We decided to top off this trilogy of discussing Godzilla and the kaiju genre in particular with the recent release of Godzilla King of the Monsters. I'm glad to have him on to discuss this. Thank you for joining me, Matthew.
Oh, no, thank you. Like I said, it's been a real pleasure talking about Godzilla and Gamera, and I love the fact that I'm Sonic Cinema's resident kaiju expert.
Unfortunately, it is not a paid position. I wish I could do that, but you know that's how it works. I also have resident Star Wars experts as well, so you know, and they don't get paid either.
Yeah.
So this is actually this is actually pretty fun the way this turned out. That we ended up doing Godzilla, we ended up talking about Gamera 3, and now we're sort of wrapping this up with Godzilla King of the Monsters, which came out a couple weeks ago in the U.S. and worldwide. The critical response to it overall was pretty was not really good. But
no, it definitely got mixed reviews from what I was. I mean, I generally try to stay away from Rotten Tomatoes as a whole because I do think it's a bit of a flawed system the way they congregate the reviews and average. But I know on I sometimes like to check the Metacritic scores on IMDb, and you know you're in trouble like when it's like 20 and below. But at least, but in this case, I think it was hovering around between 50 and 60, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it definitely had mixed reviews.
Mm-hmm. It's actually kind of funny because as much as I like and appreciate what the Gareth Edwards film did in 2014 and tried to do, we did touch on flaws in the approach to that movie in our first podcast when we were talking about Godzilla in particular. But I have to say, I was pleasantly entertained and enjoyed King of the Monsters quite a bit.
Oh yeah, no, same here. I mean, and like you said, I mean, we went over the 2014 film with the fine tooth comb, and you know, I made it pretty clear that I wasn't really a big fan of it, but not necessarily for the reasons that people were pointing out at the time. You know, the lack of Godzilla and such. Really, just more because it felt like a wasted opportunity, and especially in light of. Because I think I was doing some reading the other day, and I believe that Legendary, because you know basically Toho licensed the rights to these characters, and so if I'm not mistaken, I think Legendary had signed a 3-film deal for these characters. So, so, which is why, and I guess we'll probably touch on this a little later, but because I'm jumping the gun a bit, but so no, I think Legendary, they had acquired the rights for I think a 2 or 3 film deal, so which is why we're kind of getting this kind of MonsterVerse trilogy here. But if anything, hearing that made me hate the 2014 film even more because of the fact that you had 3 films. You know, you could have done so much with that first one. But enough about the first one. Let's talk about the pleasantly surprising and quite entertaining King of the Monsters. So so did you watch it in IMAX or did you see the regular?
I did not see it. No, I did not see it in IMAX. I did see it in large format theaters though.
Okay.
The theater I work at does have a large format theater. It's comparable to the digital IMAX as far as like the screen size and stuff like that. So I saw it that way, but it wasn't like a format for IMAX. But I wanted to see it in the large theater format because of the fact that I did actually see the Gareth Edwards movie in IMAX, and I really love that. Um,
Yeah, no, I thought. I mean, I don't know if King of the Monsters, because I know sometimes they'll. I guess because it's a trend nowadays to convert your film to 3D or to upscale it to IMAX just to earn those extra theater dollars.
yeah,
But so I don't know if King of the Monsters actually had scenes shot in IMAX. I'd have to look into that. But I mean, from what I saw, it looked really nice. The sound, especially, was quite spectacular, and I almost can't imagine watching it. It's going to be very hard to watch this on DVD and Blu-ray when it inevitably
yeah,
comes out. But no, I mean, it looked and sounded great. And I mean, for anyone out there who's listening, if you haven't seen it, I mean, I would definitely recommend trying to see it in that format if you can. Even if it's not authentic IMAX, it's to see these titans, I guess pun intended, since that's what we called them in the movie. To see them on the big screen and big sound really does make a difference. But no, I mean, I was very pleasantly surprised. So I know that has to do with the direction too, because I think the director was Michael Dougherty.
yes,
I'm not sure if I'm right. So he did. It was that was kind of thing, the Christmas horror film from a few years back.
yes,
I think that was him. So so I felt like he had a sensibility for this kind of material because I'll tell you what, because watching King of the Monsters, I kind of it gave me the feeling of watching a classic Godzilla film, particularly from the '60s, in the sense that you had this sort of over-the-top villain in Chris Dance, or Charles Dance, rather.
Charles Dance, yes.
Because I think there's a scene when they're on an elevator and the little girl like kind of looks up at him, and Charles Dance tries to pretend he's human by smiling, but it's like it's the most awkward thing ever. It's such a cartoony villain thing to do. And then of course you had I guess what some might call, not that I personally believe it, but like in the context of the film, you had sort of like the eco-terrorists, which is something that came up a bit in the '60s and '70s. And then, of course, you had a huge monster melee where you had like all the greatest hits of all the kaiju.
Mm-hmm.
So in some respects, it kind of gave me a feeling of watching a classic Godzilla film from the '60s. And I mean, there were so many little Easter eggs tossed in, I feel, for like the hardcore fans. I mean, the scene where Mothra resurrects Godzilla with her fairy dust from the wings.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that actually comes from one of the films that was made in the '90s. And that's kind of a bit of a deep cut, and especially the I don't know. Are there technically still spoilers for this movie, or should we go?
I think we're sort of past the. I mean, I think once you get past the second weekend, I feel like it's kind of fair game. I mean, we can put a spoiler warning on this, but I mean, fact of the matter is, we're talking about as the movie is still in theaters, so.
Yeah, I'm never quite sure because I've heard so many different things about what the rules are, or the quote unquote rules.
Yeah, I think after 2 weekends, I think it's fair game.
That people have seen it, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and for me, I think the biggest deep cut as far as references to the classic series go would be the post-credits sequence where Charles Dance buys the severed King Ghidorah head. Because I think in the 1991 film Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Ghidorah is killed. One of his heads are chopped off, and then he's resurrected as a Mecha King Ghidorah. So it makes me wonder whether, I think we were joking about this on one of the last podcasts, but it makes me wonder whether Kong versus Godzilla is going to end up being a Batman v Superman thing where we'll see them fight. And then there'll be that moment where one of them mentions Mothra, and they're like, how do you know her name? But where they'll end up like teaming up against maybe potentially a Mecha King Ghidorah.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so there were lots of fun Easter eggs in that, and overall I thought it was really entertaining. I thought there was a great balance between the monster action, but also the human characters as well. Because again, in the 2014 film, everyone was saying about how there was too much focus on the humans. But again, if you watch any Godzilla film, I would argue that 3/4, if not more so, is comprised of scenes involving human characters. So
Yeah.
I don't think that's a legitimate excuse. But in this case, I actually thought the human characters for the most part were pretty engaging. I mean,
Mhm.
some of them were, you have that. I don't know his name offhand, but I just call him the dad from Get Out, the Get
Yeah,
Out dad.
yeah. Bradley.
Um,
It's
do
Bradley
you know?
Whitford or something like that.
Is that's it?
But
I
I
don't
know who
know.
you're talking about. Yeah,
You
because
know who I Get Out dad there.
yeah,
So he, I guess he was the designated guy to spout one-liners and quips
yeah,
throughout the whole thing, and some hits, some miss. I mean, I think the
yeah.
the most cringy one was where I think one of the characters says God, and then he says Scylla, and like, uh, but no. So I mean, I was pretty surprised. I thought they captured the spirit of a lot
Mhm.
of the classic films. Uh, and I mentioned this on in my mini Facebook review, but I think the biggest thing for me, and I would imagine I know you haven't seen all the Godzilla films, but I would consider you a bigger Godzilla fan than, let's say, some of the average folks that might be interested in seeing King of the Monsters are. I mean, you know your stuff, so I would imagine that you felt the same way too. Like, look, I as much as like I love, for me, Godzilla will always be associated with man in suit, the
Yeah,
whole rubber suit thing, and
yeah.
and I feel like you either like it or you don't. I mean, that's the whole thing about the kaiju
Mhm.
genre. It's you either buy it or you don't. But seeing these characters fully developed and presented in CGI with the expressions, especially King Ghidorah, because I love King Ghidorah, but I'll be the first to admit that if you watch those classic films, those those heads always look so dead and lifeless because he's obviously being flown around on cables and such. So to actually see Ghidorah look like I would venture to say a terrifying monster. It kind of, I won't lie, I got a little teary eyed seeing some of this stuff
Mhm.
because, you get the feeling that these were the kinds of fights that, the filmmakers back in the 60s and 70s wanted to make, but were obviously limited
Yeah.
with the technology. Whereas now, with CGI, you can create a lot of this stuff. And I know some people might think that's sacrilege for saying that, but at this point, criticizing a film for using CG is sort of moot for
Yeah.
me. I just feel like that's where special effects are going. I mean, if you studied special effects, they've evolved from
Mhm.
stop animation to practical to what we see now. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure a man in suit Godzilla film would really work in Hollywood right now because I think
Oh
Hollywood is
no.
people to yeah.
No.
I
I
don't know
mean,
unless it's made as a comedy. But
yeah. No, and
yeah, what did you think?
um overall, I mean, I think one of the things that like if I had one sort of big complaint about that movie is that I felt like it was a little too long. I did
Yeah.
think Gareth Edwards' movie was pretty lean and mean. It's like right under 2 hours.
Hmm.
King of the Monsters goes on a little too long, but overall, I think the way they were able to bounce the story with the monsters, the Titans, versus the human element of it really made that not as much of an issue for me.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's around 219 or somewhere in that ballpark,
Yeah,
or
it's
maybe 11, or it's definitely over 2 hours.
yeah.
I mean, I feel, and I mean, this sort of, because I'm sort of glad that we're doing this a couple weeks after we've seen the film, just
Mm-hmm.
because I remember like after seeing the film I was gushing about it, whereas now I've had some time to let that gestate.
Yeah.
So some of the flaws becoming a little more apparent than they might have been, after seeing it for the first time. But yeah, I feel like the length, the reason why it's a little long, and is because, and again, I mean, because Legendary has the rights to the film, these characters for only so many movies, so I feel like they tried to kind of maybe stuff a little too much into King of the Monsters.
Yeah.
I must admit that as much as and this was something else I really liked about the film, because if you might remember, like for the 2014 film, my problem was that Godzilla sort of just came across as a regular monster. There was really no backstory or any attempt to try to make the film,
Right.
like the character, relate to American audiences.
Yeah.
Um, so with King of the Monsters, I feel like they rectified some of that by by insinuating that these creatures had lived before humans did, and they're coming back to reclaim the earth. So I kind of like that. I thought that was an interesting take. At least they're trying to etch these character mythology and whatnot. But I also felt that as interesting as that was, I kind of felt like the same way I felt when I watched Batman v Superman, in the sense that I felt like I missed the movie going into this. You know what I mean? I don't know if you felt that way, but I felt like this wasn't really addressed in the first film. I mean, it's sort of addressed in the post-credit sequence for Kong Skull Island, but I feel like that's very presumptuous to assume that people are going to remember that one isolated scene, especially when it's not really developed in any of the. You know what I mean? So I felt
especially since and I've only seen Kong Skull Island once, and I'm gonna have to see it again before Godzilla versus Kong comes out. And the thing is, it's like I knew that obviously that we're talking about this monster verse where Godzilla and King Kong were going to interact, but at the same time, I didn't. When you watch Kong Skull Island, it doesn't. The movie itself doesn't feel like it's part of the same universe as the Gareth Edwards film.
Yes, yeah, it was definitely because the Godzilla films have been, and we could definitely talk about this, but they've definitely been very dark in some cases, literally. But in terms of how everything takes place at night, but whereas Kong is more in the daytime, where you can actually see the action and such, and it had a bit of a lively. That's why I think we might have even talked about this earlier, but that's why I was a little confused as to what film technically kicks off the monster verse, because I felt that Kong kind of did a better job than the 2014 film, because because Kong takes place before Godzilla, because I think it takes place in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that.
And so like with the post-credit sequence where they kind of introduce all the monsters that we would see in King of the Monsters, and say that they've been here for millions of years and such. That's why I felt that film technically kind of kicked off the MonsterVerse, just because there's more of a direct tie what we're going to see with these next few films. I just felt like I was very interested in the mythology, but at the same time, I felt like I would have liked to have seen that introduced in the Gareth Edwards film.
Yeah.
Because then you would have gotten all that exposition out of the way. You could have potentially introduced some of the other monsters, and that way perhaps King of the Monsters would have ended up being a little leaner, because when you think about it, you're kind of stuffing 3 origin stories into like film. So that was one of my. It's like you. I mean, I definitely felt it was a little long, but I also feel like one of the reasons was that they may have tried to stretch this movie a little too much for its own good.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, again, seeing these creatures fight for the first time was definitely a sight to behold. I thought Rodan actually. I like the way Ghidorah kind of came off, but I thought that Rodan actually got the best treatment, because if you watch any of the classic films, he's always the dopiest looking kaiju. He's a pterodactyl, but like when he stands on land, like his head is constantly bobbing, and he doesn't look like a very serious threat. Whereas in this film, he's the biggest he's ever been. I think they did some motion capture where they actually had an actor doing the physical, like his facial expressions, and that definitely shows, particularly at the end of the film, where well, again, assuming people have seen this, so at the end of the film, all monsters kind of come and bow down to Godzilla. Rodan's expressive, so I kind of got a kick out of that. And if anything else, I kind of thought Mothra might have got the short end of the stick, in the sense that her design wasn't. I think that might be an example of how I actually prefer the rubber suit to the CG. I felt like with the CG, Mothra didn't quite look as good as I was maybe hoping she would. Mm-hmm. But then I'll tell you this: one of the great thrills of seeing the film wasn't so much the movie itself; it was more the aftermath, because there were a lot of kids who kind of came to see the film, and as I was exiting the theater, there was a bunch of kids all standing together, and it was just really nice seeing them talk about this stuff and how cool it was, and we should try and like find some of the older films. So when I heard that, I got really
Yeah.
excited, and I almost wanted to talk to them and give them a lecture about Godzilla film. Instead, I pointed them out in the direction of our Sonic Cinema podcasts.
All right.
But
Yeah.
but so I mean, so at the end of the day, if this film, with warts and all, if it introduces people to the greater world that exists out there with all the other films, I mean, I'm happy.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I mean, and given, you talking about how Legendary really only has the license for like 3 movies, it's like, I do agree that it's like it felt like, especially with this one, that they're going through a little too much of his rogues gallery, and
Yeah,
like,
at the very, they could have broken it up over a couple of.
But given the fact that it's like they supposedly only have like 3 movies license for these characters, it's like that kind of makes more sense. But at the same time, you are right. It does sort of make some of the choices they make in the first movie feel a bit more disappointing, even more disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, they could have introduced Mecha Godzilla, because that's another one of Godzilla's big popular foes. I would say probably right under Ghidorah, and I mean, unless Mecha Godzilla is going to make an appearance in Godzilla vs. Kong, I don't think we're going to see that this time around. But no, I mean, was there anything else that kind of stood out for you as a flaw, or is something that?
Well, I mean, I love the action between the Titans in this movie. I think I think the entire movie is really beautiful. Just the way they shot it, the way they in the way that they built the action sequences, I thought was really it was just really beautiful to watch. I mean, I think if you're going to do these characters in CG, it's like I do feel like they're making the most out of that when it comes to the action sequences.
Well, let me ask you this, because I recently watched. I don't know if you're familiar with the Angry Video Game Nerd or James Rolfe at all.
A little bit. I haven't watched any of his videos in a while, but yeah, I mean, I've seen some of his videos.
Well, because he's a filmmaker, and I really enjoy his because he'll do videos with different people, but I often enjoy the film reviews that he does where he's by himself just talking to the camera, because he's really knowledgeable and very passionate about the things that interest him. And so among the things that he's interested in is kaiju or Godzilla movies. And so his main criticism of King of the Monsters is that most, if not all, the action involving the Titans seem to take place at night and in the rain. And I was just curious as to how you thought about that. Did that sort of hamper your enjoyment of those scenes, or did you feel they overdid it a bit? Or
I definitely felt that way at the end. The final scene in Boston, I felt like that really that didn't necessarily help matters any when it came to the action. I thought the other sequences were otherwise fine. I didn't have a problem with it so much in the earlier action sequences, but yeah, the scene in Boston was definitely could have been helped to have that sequence like either during the day or at night, but also not raining. I think that was the biggest issue.
Yeah, it was just because it felt like a lot of the same. I mean, the battles themselves were different, but I mean, I definitely felt that there could have been a little more variety, and that's why I'm kind of hoping for Kong or Godzilla versus Kong, because I know the original one from '62, a lot of the action did take place on sunny tropical locations. So I'm kind of curious as to how that carries over to this new one. I mean, I had heard some theories, as to why they tend to do that kind of stuff, because it's not just Godzilla. I find like a lot of these films seem to take place like when they have these big fights, they tend to take place at night or with the rain or in very distracting environments. I'd heard like if there's like flaws with the CG, it's an easy way to kind of cover it, so you're not really noticing that. But then when I hear that, I'm thinking, well, why are there flaws in the CG? With a $200 million budget, there better not be any damn flaws.
Yeah. Well,
But
I think sort of part of the issue with that is you've got filmmaker, you've got studios that are so determined to make the uh, release date as opposed
yeah,
to
mhm.
making the movie as perfect as it can be. I think that might play a part into that.
That's a very good point, and that's why it always strikes me that these films seem to be, and not just this, but I think like any like at the rate that they're making Star Wars movies and Marvel movies,
Yeah.
it's astonishing that they can get as many done in a year, because you would think these things would take anywhere between 3 to 5 years a piece, especially for something with involving a lot of special effects. But
Yeah.
I guess they're able to either fast track it, or maybe they're just really good at it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping like for the last one that they end up doing that there might be a little more variety in terms of the locales, and then
Yeah.
of course the lighting itself, because it would be nice to actually see them fight in the daytime, and
Hmm.
get to see them all, warts and all.
Yeah, and I think I think this movie definitely benefited from the fact that we talked about the one of the biggest complaints about the Gareth Edwards movie was that it focused on too much on the human characters, not enough on Godzilla. I think thinking about that, especially in context of King of the Monsters, it didn't help that the characters that did follow in Godzilla were largely relatively uninteresting characters.
Yes.
Like if it had been solely focusing on like Ken Watanabe, Wanata, uh,
Okay. Oh, geez. Yeah. I
yeah,
always get.
and Sally Hawkins'
Yes.
character in the original Godzilla, and then maybe you don't kill Bryan Cranston the first 30 minutes. I think you've got an infinitely more interesting movie that people will have appreciated a little bit more. Um,
Oh, definitely. I definitely think that if they had done that, people would be a little more forgiving.
yeah,
Because that's the thing, yeah. Because I mean, if you are going to focus a lot of the action on the human characters, they should be interesting and engaging. And again, I think for the most part they were in King of the Monsters. I
yeah,
can't think of an offhand who didn't really belong there.
mm-hmm,
I mean, even some of the characters who had sort of cringy one-liners, I kind of even that I considering who directed the film, I wouldn't be surprised if that was put there deliberately as sort of a throwback to
yeah,
action films where as much as we like to look at these movies with rose tinted glasses, if you put your critic's hat on, you'll find plenty
oh
to
yeah,
plenty. So I didn't really mind that much. Again, I really like I really should have wrote these character names down before I did this, but I really like the mother daughter
yes,
storyline.
yeah,
That was very interesting, and I think that carried for the most part a lot of the non kaiju action. I thought that was probably,
mm-hmm,
I mean, second to seeing all the kaiju stuff. I thought that was a very interesting story. I thought like she had some interesting layers, because I mean, while I mean, you could argue she was either a hero or a villain, but either way, there was a lot of subtlety and
mm-hmm,
nuance to what she was doing. You could almost, to some extent, kind of see where she was coming from, but at the same time, you could sort of see what happens when people
yeah,
decide to make decisions for the rest of the world, and
mm-hmm.
how they may not agree with that decision when it involves unleashing monsters.
Right,
Um, so I really appreciated that. And again, I mean, I like Charles Dance as the cartoony villain.
yeah,
If anything, I almost kind of wish we saw a little more of him, because he did seem to disappear about halfway into the
mm-hmm,
movie. But judging by the post credit sequence, it would seem that he may have a role in the next one that they're doing. So that would
yeah.
be fun. And if I'm not mistaken, I thought the character who the father character, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was in Kong Skull Island.
I don't,
I'm not sure. I think a friend pointed
let
that out to me. How that,
me let me
cause that
see.
if that's the case, I think that character deserves a medal, because not only did he fight Kong, he fought Godzilla and survived. So there's something to be said. Not too many people could say that.
Yeah. No, Kyle
Um,
Chandler. Yeah, I mean he's and I mean yeah, I do agree that it's like yeah, you feel like maybe Charles Dance was a bit toward scripted, but at the same time, I mean, with the post-credit sequence, it's like, yeah, you kind of get the feeling you're going to see that character again. Um,
Hmm.
Bradley Whitford is the character who, from Get Out. He's best known now for Get Out.
Yeah.
Even though he's always been, although he was, um, before that, he was best known for his role in The West Wing. Um,
Oh yes. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. But you're right.
yeah. And
Oh.
then it's
Okay.
it's funny. It's like I looked at his character watching the movie, and I couldn't help but think of his character in Cabin in the Woods, the Drew Goddard horror film.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I couldn't
Oh
help but
gosh.
think about him in that one. Is this one sort of like an extension of that?
Oh boy, because I think actually got Cabin in the Woods in my Netflix queue. I might actually watch that tonight now that you brought him up, and I'd forgotten that he was in that as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, so no, so I mean, like and look at this. We've had a conversation about all the fun characters, which isn't something you can always say about a Godzilla film. It's
No,
usually
it
you kind of
isn't.
kaiju. I found some of the human characters just as interesting. I mean, again, I avoided reviews going into the movie
Hmm.
because, well, I mean, one, I mean, this was a film I was going to see no matter what, but also I just feel like, some reviews are kind of written with an agenda in mind as opposed to, really giving people an honest assessment of what the movie's about. So I avoided them going into the movie. But then after the fact, I started reading some just to see if, I was the only one who enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, I mean, people seem to think that there were maybe too many human characters. And I mean, uh, I don't know if there's any validity to that, but I mean, I suppose you could have condensed a few characters into one, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, again, if you watch any classic Ishiro Honda Godzilla film, I mean, there that those films had casts of thousands. I
Yeah.
mean, you're in the sense that it was always a large group of people
Yeah.
coming together from different backgrounds to team up and save the world. So I thought in many respects this film. I mean, obviously, minus the CGI and maybe a few other things, wouldn't necessarily look out of place, if you were to put
Hmm.
that in the classic lineup, because it really did feel like a throwback to
Yeah, and I
that.
mean, I think for the most part, I mean, I think like sort of the monsters as metaphor and the fact that they actually brought like a an ecological theme to the film, I think that definitely helped.
Yeah,
With
I was reading that actually in your because when you posted your review, I definitely wanted to see what you thought of the film, and yeah, I read that. I read what you wrote there, and yeah, I mean, I think there definitely was a bit of that there too, and I think that helped the film quite a bit because it gave it that message
hmm
that I felt the previous film was lacking, and when Godzilla was first conceived in '54, I mean, it was meant to be a metaphor for the follies of man and what
yeah.
happens when too far. So I definitely felt that was in there in this film. If anything, maybe it could have been. Well, I don't know if it could have been pushed more than that. I think it was pretty straightforward. But
hmm
but I liked how they included that and
Yeah.
how they tried to view the monsters. I'm still a little confused as to how that was going to save the Earth, having monsters. I'm still a
Yeah,
little
I
lost. It's supposed to help, but
yeah.
I mean, it's great for the monsters. I'm not sure how
Yeah.
that benefits us, but
No, that is an excellent point. Well, it's funny. I will say I did like the and I will say it's like I did like the callback to the idea of the oxygen destroyer. You know,
oh
the
yes,
weapon that they originally tried to kill King Ghidorah with. That is
oh
obviously
yes, when they
how
drop it,
Godzilla dies in the original movie.
yes. Although I must say that I got a kick out of seeing that too, but I think the fact that it didn't actually kill any of the monsters is,
Yeah.
I mean, either they've developed some immunity to this because, well, it's just funny because the oxygen destroyer is supposed to be this impervious weapon that
Right.
can do wrong, but so I kind of got a kick out of how it only it kind of it's going to sound odd, but it kind of reminded me of the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where like Godzilla gets like, oh, it's just a scratch.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah,
so,
that's true. It didn't
but
really kill anything.
But that's a good point. That's a good point because, like, yeah, there were so many fun little Easter eggs for fans,
Yeah.
and that was definitely a big one there. I did like visually, at least, when they kind of I think it was they went into the ocean. They found Godzilla's, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, Godzilla's lair,
Yeah.
where he was feeding on, because they've always sort of alluded to that in the earlier classic films about how he feeds on nuclear energy, but
Yeah.
we've never seen it, or we've never actually, we don't really know what that means. I'm not sure what it means to feed on nuclear energy. So it was kind of nice to, like, visually, and especially like in the IMAX, or even if you saw it like in a large format,
Yeah.
those scenes really look gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then they blew it up.
Mm-hmm.
They blew up the location, but it's, that was a nice little piece to the Godzilla mythos that was kind of missing. I actually thought in some of the earlier films, so it's nice that they kind of threw that in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Uh,
I did really like the score to this one by Bear McCreary. Um,
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes, yes. I'm glad you brought that up because,
mm,
yeah, I love the score too, and I especially loved all the inclusion of the classic Akira. God, I never know how to pronounce it. Akira Ifukube, the original composer of
yes.
Godzilla. There were a lot of callbacks to his classic stuff. That
Mm-hmm.
was something I thought was also missing in the 2014, because
Yeah.
I don't think they had any of the classic Godzilla cues. So I liked how I like how in some cases in King of the Monsters they included them in their entirety, like the way they
Mm-hmm.
were originally recorded, and then there were some cases where it was sort of remixed into a more modern score.
Yeah.
But what a difference it makes when you have those classical
Mm-hmm.
cues.
Yeah,
Just because.
and as much as I really love Alexander Desplat's score for the 2014 movie, yeah, I was definitely much more entertained, and yeah, I mean the callbacks to the classic themes and stuff like that were a really great touch. And it almost feels, it's weird because it almost feels like with the 2014 film they were trying to see if modern American audiences would resonate with, Godzilla as a big large scale movie monster. And so
Mhm.
they kind of wanted to do they wanted to kind of do their own thing about it. They didn't want to go too deep into um the what anybody who's seen like any of the old school Godzilla movies, any of those ideas. And then with this one it's like, oh, okay, we can have some fun with this now. And it feels like that's sort of a different, it's very much, you mentioned, not incorrectly, that it's like this, it feels like 2014, it feels like this is a little bit more of what they're trying to do with a monster movie than the 2014 was.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this was it's odd to say, but this film was both a more serious film than the 2014 film, but also more fun too.
Yeah.
I'd say serious in the sense that there was a more concerted effort to have a compelling backstory for these creatures, like where did they come from.
Mm-hmm.
I like how they don't necessarily sort of rely on the tried, tested and true. Well, these creatures were, some dropped a nuke on them and they mutated into this. That always felt like a very easy way to describe these creatures, like where they came from and that. So I like how in this case there was this insinuation that they've lived for millions of years and were here before us. If anything, it almost had the Lovecraft feel, like these are the elder ones or the old ones that have come back to claim the earth. So yeah, I mean, I definitely felt that, and yeah, I mean, I know we were talking about how the 2014 kind of missed the boat, and as far as trying to find a way to reinvent Godzilla, but I think King of the Monsters picked up the slack for that, and it's definitely out of all the U.S. films, it's definitely, at least for my money, the best one. I mean,
Mhm.
mind you, that's not too much considering
No.
what the competition is. But you know, I mean, but on its own, I thought it was a good film, and certainly one of the as far as like the big budget special effects films go, certainly the best that I've seen this year so far. Although John Wick 3 comes pretty close.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I'm looking forward to the next one. I mean, I do think it's a shame that the rights were obtained for as few films as they were obtained for. But I guess Toho is pretty and I don't blame them considering some of the past incarnations of
Yeah.
Godzilla. I don't blame them for wanting to keep a short leash on Hollywood for that. But hopefully between this film and hopefully the Kong one as well, Legendary has proven itself to be a studio that is taking this seriously and wants to make good films and just doesn't want to cash on the past reputation of these characters. That hopefully Toho gives them another shot to maybe expand the universe a little more and maybe introduce some of the other kaiju.
Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, maybe give us that big Godzilla versus Gamera dream match that everyone wants to see, but for whatever reason has never happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. Yeah, I definitely agree that I think Godzilla King of the Monsters is it's definitely the way this summer's going as far as big movies. I mean, it's kind of like there's not really a whole lot that I'm overly excited about the rest of this summer. Like this was, I mean, Midsummer, the Ari Aster movie, which isn't a big scale movie at all, but it's a movie I'm definitely looking forward to. Spider-Man: Far From Home is a fan of the MCU I want to see, but like as far as there's not really much in the way of big action movies that I'm really getting that excited about most of the rest of the year, and it's like this one definitely does stand out as something that is entertaining, and I mean, I think does what it wants to do really well.
Yeah, and I hope because I've noticed too. I think its opening weekend. I mean, it feels so silly to say it only made $130 million, but because $130 million is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I think it only made $130 million for its opening weekend, or somewhere in that ballpark. And
yeah, worldwide, it that was around where it was, and it's like,
was that the worldwide?
That was worldwide, yeah, because domestically, it's only made $80 million right now, which is crushing to me. Because I was looking at the box office mojo, and it's like it may not even pass the Roland Emmerich Godzilla, the domestic box office, and that breaks my damn heart.
Yeah, that's really, really sad to hear.
Yeah.
And you see, and that's interesting because I can't help but wonder whether the reputation of the Emmerich film, and to some extent the Gareth Edwards film, kind of hurt the chances that this film had. I feel like maybe some people might have written Godzilla off altogether, thinking, "Oh, is this just going to be another one of these movies?" And that's a shame because this is actually a really good film, and they actually a lot of I mean, whatever flaws it might have, I think the good far outweighs the bad, and I feel like, especially if you have like youngsters in the family and you want to introduce them to Godzilla. I mean, and for whatever reason you don't want to start with like 54 one. This is as good a film as any to introduce newcomers to, because you literally have, like you said, the rogues gallery of characters there. I mean, that's the Mount Rushmore of Godzilla villains. All there. There was something else that I noticed. I don't know if you picked up on it, but the end credits, when they were listing all the actors, after all the human characters, they actually credited Godzilla, and it was like Godzilla as himself, Mothra as herself. So I thought that was a cute little Easter egg little thing that they threw in at the end.
Yeah, that was. I think I had seen that on Twitter like a few, because I didn't see it opening night. Unfortunately, I had to wait a couple of days to see it, but I had already seen that on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, I did like that little touch, and I like how the end credits sort of sort of fill in a little bit of the blanks and stuff like that,
Hmm.
getting ready for Godzilla versus Kong, which I hope really turns out well. Um,
I hope so too. I mean, the original one is probably like I think I mentioned this the first time we talked about this. I think that was probably the first Godzilla film I had ever seen, or at least that I owned on VHS.
mhm.
So I mean, like for me, like the nostalgia is pretty strong with this film. I mean, I don't. I'm I don't want to go in with negative expectations, but I mean, I'm not expecting it to be necessarily as fun as the original one because at that time King Kong had been re-released, so Kong was popular again and
Yeah.
Godzilla had loaded, so they really captured lightning in a bottle at that time.
Mhm.
Whereas now I feel like, especially in light of what you were telling me about how much money King of the Monsters made, I feel like excitement of Godzilla is not quite at that fever pitch
Yeah.
like it might have back in the 60s. So I don't know if this film is going to feel as monumental as it might have felt back in the 60s. But I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I'm curious to see what Adam Weingart brings to the table
Mhm.
because because of his background in mumblecore movies. So
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious as to how this is going to work. But then again, sometimes directors who come from a completely different background end up surprising you the most, and because they're thinking outside the box and they're not coming into a franchise with the baggage that comes with being a genre director. Like for example, I mean, as much as people like J.J. Abrams, I think people are equally annoyed with some of his more some of the flourishes that he includes in his films
Yeah.
that people aren't crazy about. So I mean, whether he makes a good or a bad film, people are just going to write it off as a J.J. Abrams film, right?
Mhm.
Whereas Adam Weingart, I feel, doesn't have that reputation, because he has a very diverse background as a filmmaker, and it's kind of an inspired choice to have him direct the final part of this trilogy. So I wish him well. I hope it turns out really good. I'll probably be there, front row center, on day one.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm curious to see if any other kaiju make an appearance. But speaking actually on the subject of Kong, because I guess we can talk about it here because I mentioned it on Facebook, that I felt that the ending of King of the Monsters was a bit of a missed opportunity. That's one of the things that was another one of the flaws I had with the film. So, but before I say this, I think your enjoyment of what I would do differently with King of the Monsters is contingent on you getting this reference. So, have you ever seen the movie Ape?
Can't say that I have.
Okay, have you ever seen a GIF of a guy in a gorilla suit flipping someone off after smashing an airplane?
But yes, I think I have.
I'm sure it's very so. So there's a film called APE, which is an acronym for I think automatic prim. I'll send you I forget offhand, but anyway, it's a King Kong knockoff film from Korea. Uh, so, so when Kong was remade in '76, the Dino De Laurentiis one,
Mhm.
with Charles Grodin, and so a lot of countries jumped on the bandwagon. Like England made a film called Queen Kong, which is like a musical. There was a film in the States called The Mighty Gorga, which was a very terrible but highly entertaining knockoff. And then there was Ape. And you should really, if you get a chance to track it down, you should really watch it. It's I won't lie to you, I won't say it's a good film in any sense of the word, but it's very entertaining. And so there's a scene where as they're wont to do, planes are trying to shoot down the giant kaiju invading their town, and so Kong just sort of, I mean Ape sort of smashes one of the airplanes and then flips him off, which is like, it's so I thought, what would have been kind of fun, especially since the film has so many throwbacks and little Easter eggs. You know how at the end of King of the Monsters, when Ghidorah is defeated, and then all these kaiju are coming out of the
Yeah.
woodwork, and they pay tribute to Godzilla.
Mhm.
I because they hint at the fact that during all this chaos, that Kong sort of is out there gallivanting, doing stuff. So Kong must be aware of what's happening, and so I thought it was a bit of a missed opportunity because at the end where they're all kind of bowing to him, maybe like Godzilla kind of looks off to the side and he sees Kong standing there, and like he's expecting Kong to show his respect, but instead Kong flips him off. And then it just sets up Kong versus Godzilla, where you could literally pick up the pieces, or you could, So I mean, I know they would never do that for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I just thought, like, given the director, because he seems to have that sensibility. Krampus is any indication. I don't know. I thought that might have been a fun little wink to knock off kaiju films, but also as a way to kind of set up Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
But I understand why they didn't go that direction.
That would have been funny, though.
Yeah.
That would have been really funny. But
yeah, I mean, anything else that stands out to you about the movie?
I don't really think I have anything else. Yeah, it was. I do want to see it again. I am I'm kind of, we'll see how it holds up when it comes to on like Blu-ray and DVD, because I mean, yeah, you're gonna miss that big screen experience, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to. I really enjoyed it. It is. I would definitely say I probably enjoy it more in the 2014 movie. And yeah, I'm looking forward to what Godzilla versus Kong has to offer next year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too, and again, I mean, for anyone who might have written this film off because of the 2014 or especially the 1998 film, really give it a chance. I mean, it's so like, I don't know, because I mean, I feel like you would. I'm not sure how old you are, but I get the feeling we might be the same generation. So I know, like, when we were growing up, there was, with the exception of Godzilla 1985 and Godzilla 2000, I mean, there was never any Japanese Godzilla films that were first run in theaters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so the idea that we live in a time where these films are coming out like literally 1 year after the other, I mean, people should cherish these times, because they may not come back again, and it's a real shame that this film didn't do as well financially, because hopefully that doesn't deter anyone from picking up the ball and running with this again, because I think the MonsterVerse could be a fun cinematic universe if given to develop the mythologies of all the characters. Because again, I do feel like it's rushing things a little bit, but I understand the crunch. They want to knock out all the greatest hits while they still have the rights. So no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm curious as to what characters are going to make that film, as far as some of the human characters go, because there were some fun ones from Kong Skull Island, but then again, that film takes place in the 60s, so I don't think Brie Larson or Samuel L. Jackson are going to be showing up in the so I'm curious if there's any sort of continuity from that movie that carries over with this one. And again, I mean, seeing these two creatures fighting in CGI, doing the kinds of things that, I mean, again, as much as I love the original film, that they couldn't pull off in that movie, it's really going to be something to see. And I definitely would encourage anyone who has even the slightest interest in this stuff to go out and support these films, because it feels weird saying that we need to get people to support these. It's almost like we're talking about these small independent movies. It's like, you should support these struggling $200 million franchises.
I know, right? No, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. It's fascinating to watch on Twitter. It's like, oh, we need to support this movie. We need to support this movie. This movie's in like 4,000 screens. I mean, people, it's not like people can't find it, but the fact of the matter is, it's like that's we're saying that because of the fact that we enjoy the movie as well, and we would like to see more movies like it. And I mean, yes, it's a $200 million movie. It's like, but those movies are important to get the smaller movies made.
Yeah, and again, it's just and it's good too. I mean, it's not like a soulless franchise. It actually, they are trying to do some fun things, and I mean, it's not. No one's ever going to confuse it with being Solaris or Stalker or anything like that. But at the same time, I mean, not not every film has to be that. I
No.
mean, I think there's a place for all kinds of films, and I mean, as far as mainstream blockbusters go, this is probably one of the smarter and certainly more engaging ones. So, I enjoyed it. I was happy to see that you enjoyed it too, and I think if we get the word out. I could see this maybe becoming a bit of a cult film down the road. Maybe find its audience as these films tend to do on video down the road. I mean, I mean, as far as where it fits in the grand pantheon of the franchise, I mean, it's definitely, for me at least, the best of the U.S. films, and I would argue it's probably even better than some of the Japanese ones, particularly the ones that kind of came out in the end of the 90s, in the early part of the 2000s. Like, I enjoyed this more than Godzilla 2000, for example. Or Godzilla, the one that they made after that, the one where Godzilla is fighting these giant insects. So there's a couple forgettable ones from the 90s that I would say that King of the Monsters sort of triumphs over.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there was anything else that stood out, but I think we may have covered all the bases.
Yeah, I think we kind of did. Yeah. Well, Matthew, thank you very much for joining me today. It's always been great to talk to you, and especially given that we've had this through line of discussion with all of these, with Godzilla, with Gamera 3, and now with Godzilla King of the Monsters. It's been great to see. It's been great for me as somebody who isn't as well versed in the Godzilla franchise, but would like to be. To get to know these characters and these movies a bit better, and to where I can appreciate something like Godzilla King of the Monsters and want to go and revisit the first two movies in that Gamera trilogy. And so I definitely appreciate your insight and appreciate the discussions we've had this past year about these movies.
No, and I appreciate you having me on. I mean, any opportunity I have to talk about this stuff is one that I leap at. But again, like I've I mean, well, I mean, it's no secret we're friends, but I mean, I'm not saying this out of friendship, but I mean, I really do enjoy the work you do with Sonic Cinema. It's been such a pleasure to see this site grow from back in, because I think when did we? I mean, I know we've never physically met. But I mean, when did we do the e-meet?
2014, I think, was when I saw Eroticide.
Right. Okay. So it's been a 5-year journey.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's great to see how far you've come, and again, I mean, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast. You do such a great job, and it's funny. And don't take this as an insult, and I really don't mean it as such, but. Because I mean, for the longest time, this would have been a compliment until the whole Me Too controversy came out. Yeah. But and I'm not comparing you to him as a human being, but more as the style of interviewer goes. I really sort of liken Sonic Cinema to like the old Charlie Rose show. I mean, minus the the Me Too stuff. but you know what I mean. Like,
I know what you mean as far as like the style of the way the discussion goes and stuff like that, and just I really. Especially with people like yourself when it comes to movies, and I want to know what you think. I don't necessarily need to know what I think. I don't necessarily. Yes, obviously, part of this is me getting my interests and my opinions out there. But ultimately, especially if I have somebody else to talk to, especially if it's somebody I'm not necessarily as familiar with as some of my friends, I ultimately want to hear from you more than I want to hear myself speak. So
that's really refreshing, because like some podcasts, I mean, I can't get past the opening 5 minutes because the hosts are so obnoxious and such, and that. So I mean, it's so nice to meet someone who's as knowledgeable as you and who's humble and got a great format. So yeah, I mean, keep this up. I mean, I guess we'll have to have an epilogue to this trilogy next year when Kong and Godzilla on the big screen. But no, I mean, all this to say, I really appreciate you having me on. And even when we did our very first podcast together, when I was talking about my own work, so I mean, it's been wonderful appearing on the show, and wish you all the best, and hope to be back again soon.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll definitely continue to think of new topics. I mean, Godzilla versus Kong is next year. I mean, yes, we'll definitely try to talk about that, and then yeah, I mean, I have no doubt based on sort of our shared interests as far as film goes. I mean, I have no doubt that we'll have other subjects that we can talk about on here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I guess this is your part.
Okay. But yeah, thank you very much for. But yeah, thank you for joining me tonight. It was really great.
Oh yeah, no, my pleasure.
I'd like to thank Matthew Saliba, Sonic Cinema's resident kaiju expert, for joining me on the podcast again to discuss Godzilla King of the Monsters, thus putting a close on this trilogy of podcasts on Godzilla and kaiju in general this year. You can hear us talk about his film career in one of the episodes last year, as well as Godzilla and the history of Godzilla, as well as Gamera 3, Revenge of Iris for the Class of 99 series. Thank you very much for joining me at Sonic Cinema. Hit me up on Sonic Cinema Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There's a lot of good free stuff there, or stuff there for subscribers, as well as some early access reviews. I'm going to start to do a little bit more unique stuff as far as writing for patrons beyond just early access reviews. You'll hopefully be seeing some more interviews with filmmakers for movies that are going to be starting to screen at Atlanta soon, and just keep on with paying attention and coming to www.sonic-cinema.com for movie reviews and more. Thank you very much.